Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in.
Welcome back, everyone, to Organizational Sherlocks. This is a very exciting episode for Elizabeth and I, and a lot of our colleagues in the IO psychology space, because, this is a focus of everybody when it comes to IO psychology. And so to get into it, we've been talking about organizational structures a lot. The last 3 episodes were all focused on organizational structures, one of which was just, talking about the different types. The next was talking about leadership. And we even, drove down into Netflix's. Netflix has a very hierarchical structure, both divisional and functional within it. So when we have a hierarchical structure, guess what's involved? Elizabeth, what's involved?
There's a lot of things, but I think the word you're looking for is leaders.
Yes, there's a lot of leaders involved. So there's managers, but are they leaders? So that's an important distinction that we want to make. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about leadership and, how leaders support organizational structures, relating back to our conversation with Terry and some of the important skill sets or specifically soft skills that they're going to need to have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a topic, I know when Morgan and I were preparing for this, we were so excited because it's a topic that we're hearing a lot about in our world today and probably have been for a long time, but definitely more so today, especially with the rise of remote work. And what does that mean to be a leader in a remote setting? That won't be the primary focus, but I think it is an important consideration as well.
Yeah, and I think it definitely is. And, we've talked about internal leaders versus those that are, just promoted. So there's internal leaders in teams. They don't necessarily have a management position over their teams, but they tend to motivate those people and they become some sort of team lead, even if informally. And those people, they naturally flow into leadership. One thing I like to say is that, there is management and there is leadership, because it depends on if you're a successful leader or an effective leader. So to kind of break it apart for you is, you could be a manager and you could be great at managing your team, but are you leading your team? Meaning, are you developing people that want to follow you, or are you just managing your team, managing their day-to-day? There's a difference there. And it's so important in this day and age that management is leadership as well. So they're leading their teams to be motivated workers and to really make people enjoy the jobs they're doing. It's, leadership to an extent is being a partner, even though you're a little higher above them in the hierarchy, right?
Yeah, I think it's also about that, and my favorite word, alignment, but it's also aligning and finding a way to tell a story that aligns people to the mission or to the strategic initiatives, right? And so there's definitely a lot of those, I know you use the word soft skills. I like to call them essential skills because soft just has like a weird connotation. I don't like it. But maybe that's my own bias. But I will say, I think that those are incredibly important. And, having developed programs internally before, it was always interesting because, I'd have a request and they'd say, hey, we need a management program. We need to, skill up our managers. And my question to them was, what are we trying to skill them up on? Are we skilling them up on how to do performance reviews, how to, use the technology to approve time cards? Like what is it we're looking for? Because to me, that's management, right? That is managing the day-to-day function and operation of a team. Versus, and again, I realize there's some overlap with this as well. Versus though leadership, which is really more of that, those essential skills. And like you said, being able to kind of bring people along on the journey with you and getting their buy-in along the way.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's seen these graphics out, but there's a couple different graphics that explain the difference between a boss and a leader. And the boss is sitting in the cart that the staff are pulling, right? But a manager is also pulling the cart. He's in front of the team, and so that's an amazing graphic. It really it speaks large meaning into the term leadership and really explains it in this, this diagrammal sense. So we'll definitely post a diagram for you guys to see. But it is so important. Yes, there's an overlap because you have to have management quote unquote hard skills. So meaning technological skills, meaning, they can easily be taught. A hard skill can much more easily be taught than a soft skill.
Yes.
That's my opinion. But so there has to be an overlap, and it starts with management. But there's also leadership development involved when you develop management, or at least there should be.
Right.
And so when I develop managers, it's called leadership development. They learn both the technologies, the performance reviews, the disciplinary system. They learn that, but it's incorporated into other learnings of learning the psychological principles behind leadership, learning leadership theory, learning leadership tactics. And a big importance is emotional intelligence, so your EQ.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I would totally agree. I think that is probably one of the most kind of important attributes. And like you said, it's and I agree with you for what it's worth, that it is much easier to teach not saying it's easy. I'm not trying to lighten it, but it is much easier to teach someone a technical skill set than it is to kind of really take a look at who are we internally, right? What do we bring to the table? Like that is not only it's not only difficult, but it also requires a level of vulnerability that I know for a lot of people is really hard,
Yeah.
And I think it's important to call that out, that, when you and I and all of kind of our colleagues are out there working in leadership development, yes, we're asking people to be a little bit raw, to, kind of look at things in a way that maybe they haven't before.
Yeah.
And the impact of that is really profound,
Yeah.
not just at work. And I want to throw that out there too, is, we can develop leaders at work, but the fact that they're able to then bring that home, and bring that to their friends and their family and all of that. I mean, I can tell you, even from my own journey of kind of developing as a leader, I'm a much better mom and a much better wife now than I ever have been, because I know more about myself and how I show up.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I hear, like from an impact perspective, that's what I hear from my clients all the time is, wow, I didn't even realize that this underlying thing was happening for me. But once I figured it out, I was able to show up in a way that was much more effective.
Yeah,
so I'm guessing you probably had similar experiences.
Yeah, it's so important, because you can see not only how people are affecting each other that you're watching, but you can also see how you're affecting people. I mean, I can contribute it to my personal life, even with my partner. He would ask me for advice, and he wasn't really asking for advice. He just kind of wanted to vent. And I learned to, sometimes you just got to nod and say, okay, yeah, I'm here for you. Let's work through this. Maybe that's what he needed at the time. And same thing happens with my employees. It's just a matter of what are their needs at the time. And, maybe they're more independent, or maybe they are looking for advice. You have to understand people and how you affect them, as well as what they need at the time to properly lead them in the right direction, and lead them in a way that they're going to comprehend, right? Communication and comprehension are super important. A lot of people are like, oh, communication is key. Comprehension is key, actually. A lot of people forget about that. So, but I love when you talk about, your EQ, understanding yourself is so important, because when in my leadership development programs, I make them take all the personality tests. I make them understand themselves, because a big part of leadership is removing the self-bias that you have, really being able to take yourself out of the equation, and then changing your behaviors for the positive consequences, in a sense, the positive actions you want to see from your people after changing your own behaviors. It's so important. You have to be able to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. And I'll kind of give you a little bit of an analogy, maybe. I always screw up analogy and metaphor. I don't know. Now you guys know that about me. But anyway, so I always kind of use this with my folks. It's, we do psychological science, right? It tells us that our personality is pretty well developed, kind of in our early 20s, right? We're pretty set in kind of who we are. Not to say we can't grow, but really, I think the missing piece in that conversation is it's about choice, and what you're kind of what you're saying about like choosing how you want to show up and how you want to behave, right? And so using this analogy of kind of in a picture or an image, right? We, you know, if we have LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media platform you use, we choose what photo we want the world to see, right?
Mhm.
Like I chose my LinkedIn photo for a reason. I don't know what it was, but it probably because it looked okay. But you know, like I chose that. That is how I'm choosing to show up versus the pictures that are taken of me or the pictures I'm in that are more candid, right?
Yeah.
That's me and more in my natural state. And I think that analogy can be applied to leadership as well. What are your natural kind of internal personality and motivational kind of attributes? And then how are you leveraging them and maybe even sometimes kind of downplaying them at times, right? How are you being strategic about how you show up? That's your LinkedIn photo.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I mean, you change the way you behave, the way you show up based off of the group you're with. So Instagram, you're probably going to have more candid photos versus LinkedIn. You're probably going to have a headshot, right?
Right.
You're probably not going to have a selfie on LinkedIn as your photo, but maybe you do on Facebook, right? There's different levels of professionalism in them, and you're, attracting to different groups in a sense. And same thing goes, you act different with your family versus you act different with your friends versus you act different at work. I covered this before earlier on our podcast when we talked about you adapt to the different groups you're in. And like you say, Elizabeth, it's about connecting your own attributes and like your strengths as well as, maybe downplaying some of your strengths. It's about being adaptable. One term I really like, which, a professor in one of my philosophy courses back in the day, she introduced it to me. It's the term flexistable. You have to be flexistable. Well, a lot of people are like, what does that mean? How do you combine flexible and stable in one? Here's the explanation. You know those wooden rulers?
Yes.
Okay. So you take that wooden ruler and it's partially flexible, right?
That's fair.
But it's also sturdy enough where it's not completely altering shape and it goes back to its normal shape.
Yeah.
But if if it wasn't flexible at all, it would snap. You need to have a level of flexibility so you don't break your personality. But you need to maintain your personality, not fully alter it for the circumstances and the people around you. And that is so important for leaders to be confident in who you are, but know where you can compromise. Your values are your values, but are there ways that your values can be, connected to somebody else's? And they're not always going to connect one-to-one. There might be a little difference. So maybe, for example, you're focused on reuse of stuff, and I'm focused on recycling things instead. They have the same sustainability mission, but the way we go about it's a little different. We're flexible in that, but we're stable in the sustainability.
Yeah. You know what I keep thinking, like throughout this conversation so far, I know it's kind of a joke, and anyone who's been through a program in psychology has probably heard this about 8,000 times, but it's always it depends, right? It's nothing is just black and white. Like there's always it depends. There's always a gray. And that's just what I keep kind of thinking about, right? Because I have had people say to me, well, if I change my behavior, then I'm not showing up authentically. And it's not that dichotomous, right? Like you're adapting to meet the needs of the people around you or to achieve a goal, right? It's no different than playing a sport and changing your lineup or whatever it is so that you can achieve a goal. It doesn't mean that it's not authentic. It really is, like you said, just kind of that what did you say? Flexi-stable. All right.
Yeah, flexibility, something along those lines.
That's really what it's about, right? It's that gray and being comfortable in that place so that you can be the most effective leader out there.
And part of the gray area is, you don't have to know the answer as a leader. You can know less than the people around you. That's okay. People don't realize that, hey, you have a team that are supposed to be more specialized in certain things. You don't have to be specialized in all 5 areas that your team's specialized in. You could have a high level strategic understanding of it, but you're the strategic understanding. So you understand how it all aligns. There's that term again, right? You can understand how all those 5 areas work together, how the different divisions of an organization work together. but they're specified in those different areas. So these guys know how to do sales. This one knows how to do marketing. This one knows how to do the HR side of it. This one knows how to do the production. But how do they all align together? I'm leading the strategy. They're helping me with that strategy, but they're specialized in the actual actions of enacting that. And so being in that gray area, you don't have to be, the perfect person. You don't have to be perfect. Managers aren't perfect. Leaders aren't perfect. We're not.
We're
But
human.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
there's that.
We all need to learn, and we all need to continue learning. That's a big part of being comfortable in the gray area, as things are ever changing. Technology is ever changing. Software systems are, there's new ones popping up every single day. There's also new theories that tend to arise, or theories that arise from other ones in the psychology world. And that's because, psychology, it's an odd science because it's so theoretical in nature.
It is. Yeah.
And so
Yep.
continuous learning is so important as a leader, knowing, adapting to new situations and learning how to deal with new situations. I actually have a quote I posted earlier this week, and it was, "The wisest mind has something yet to learn."
I love that. That is so very, very true.
Mm-hmm.
The one piece that I would add, I agree with everything you said. And the one piece I would add to it around the learning is it's about being intentional and actively seeking out opportunities to learn. So I mean, maybe this is something I tell myself, but I'm guessing you probably say something similar to yourself. Like, when I feel like I know it all, that is a prime opportunity for me to get out there and learn more, because I clearly don't. Like, when I've hit that ceiling, go,
Yeah, it's so important to challenge yourself. I mean, when psychology students are in school, they're constantly learning that not only do they have to confirm what they're learning, but they also should be looking for opposite situations. And that's something that, every science should use. There should be constantly studies of, this works, this works, this works, this works. We see it working a ton of times, but, if something shows that it's not working, why didn't it work in that one study? And that could be in a business case studies. That could be depending on the company, maybe something that works for large companies across the board won't work for small companies. That's something
critical. It's critical thinking at its best, right? Like, how can we look at all sides and consider different options and the data in front of us? I mean, that's data-driven decision making is so important, and it's not to say that our intuition or our gut isn't important, because it is, right? And data-driven decision making it provides you that support, right? But I like what you're saying, because I have found, and I've witnessed it, people who only seek out the data that supports their opinion. And to me, that's an area for growth for probably quite a few of us, of like,
especially managers. They could be successful leaders, but they're not effective leaders, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because you have to consider all of the data, not just what supports your perspective. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think critical thinking, to me, that's an important part of leadership, being able to critically think and problem solve and all of that. And, there's a lot of different ways that looks, and we don't have to get into all of the cognitive science behind it. But, when I'm doing assessments, that's something we do look at, it's not just what is your capacity or your ability to critically think, it's how do you do it? So I think that's something I'm thinking about right now too, as we're talking, is, there's leadership theory, and that theory is applied to programs and all of that kind of stuff. And self-awareness is again, so important. And at the same time, we have to understand the how do I implement this now? And I will say, I think that's missing from, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the time, right? We know what emotional intelligence is, or we know what purpose-driven leadership is, or, we know what assertiveness is, but how do we apply these behaviors? How do we do things that are going to help us be effective? And that's where I think like coaching is a great place for that. Being able to kind of test it out and see what sticks and what feels natural and authentic, but also produces kind of the results and the effectiveness that you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I coach people all the time. I'm coaching business leaders. That's who I work with when I'm working with small company owners. But the how is very important. And that's what a lot of business leaders or business management, business owners are looking for is how do I incorporate these changes into my environment? How do I incorporate, there's naturally higher turnover. There's naturally more remote work going on. How do we apply all of this and how do we deal with it too? Sometimes it's not just how do we apply new psychological testing or feedback testing, also known as, learning about the satisfaction of your team, performance management, things along those lines. It's not just how do we incorporate those tests, but also how do we deal with through like the current circumstances of the business, and also how do we determine who to choose for a promotion, things along those lines. It's all very important. It can be really driven down to make sure you're an effective leader and make sure you're promoting effective leaders too, because who you choose to lead your team is going to change the outcome of how your company runs in the end. Some people say, I want to give my people autonomy, I want to make them more independent, but I'm nervous that they're going to hide mistakes from me and I'm not going to know they're happening. Well, how do you build trust with your team? You might be a successful leader, but if they're hiding these mistakes, you're not being effective. Your team's not following along with you, and you're losing a team. You're losing the team environment. It's not collaborative anymore. There's this break in the relationship that you got to fix. You got to bridge that gap.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. Well, and I think too, even taking it a step back from like, promotion or building a team, it's developing a team. I think I really think it's the responsibility of a leader to, to develop team members and to empower them to take risks, right? But be upfront about what that looks like. And like you said, that requires a level of trust. It requires a level of kind of an environment where there's psychological safety and people can bring things forward and say, hey, you know what? I tried this, didn't quite work out. Really just want to kind of talk to you about it. Let's get some feedback. Let's, kind of figure out what can we learn from the situation rather than seeing it as this like massive failure that, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired and all of that. Like that's not safe for someone, And I think that that's the tone. I mean, in a lot of ways, leaders are there to set the tone for what the team is going to be like, right? So yeah, I think it's about empowerment. It's about all of these different things. And, so I posted something on my LinkedIn the other day because I was in a coaching session with one of my clients, and it just kind of like hit me, kind of like a ton of bricks. Like, we were talking about accountability and how some people see accountability different, right? And so for some leaders, they see it as, did you get the deadline? Was the deadline met? Yeah, that's accountability, sure. But I believe that effective leaders are really there to create an environment and create a relationship where it's not just about, hey, Morgan, did you get this done? But it's about you take me as the leader. If this were the scenario, I know it's hypothetical, but if I were the leader saying, hey, Morgan, like creating this relationship with you where I'm empowering you to be accountable. And the way that I do that in my mind is by showing empathy or that emotional intelligence and communicating with you. If I can do that as a leader, then you have accountability for yourself as well.
There's lots of leadership theories and leadership tests all focusing on empathy these days because empathy is very important, not just to understand your people, but to, support them in a way. It's a combination sympathy, empathy. I know some people use those terms interchangeably, but empathy is really being able to understand those emotions. Sympathy is putting yourself in their shoes and determining how you would feel, but empathy is just understanding their emotions in the instance. And accountability is important. You can connect accountability to responsibility too. So, let's get them from the accountability of, I got this done, it was wrong, like admitting their mistakes, to responsibility to, not only did I make this mistake, but this is how I'm going to solve it. Right.
So this is what I learned from it. Right. And this is what I would do different next time.
Yeah, right? Give them the chance to make mistakes. I actually just had this conversation, funny enough, that, too many managers catch the mistakes, and that's what they think they're there for, is just to catch the mistakes and to watch the work of who they're doing. So they're not necessarily doing, strategic work or productive work themselves for the company. Instead, they're just watching the work of their team. Well, how about instead they are doing productive work for the company, whether that be strategy, whether that be developing their people to be better at their jobs, or something along those lines, maybe doing the work themselves and then supporting their team.
Right.
So instead of looking for mistakes, why don't we support them to fix their own mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about a supportive nature. So in my conversation, I said, sometimes you need to let them make the mistake, and you watch that mistake exist for a week. It's probably driving you crazy, but you want to see if they're going to catch it, or if they're going to own up to it, or if they're going to try to solve it. And if not, maybe another team member finds that mistake, unless it's obviously detrimental to the company or to the department, just the workflow of it. If it's not detrimental, let them make the mistake. See if they catch it. See if they can figure it out. Because if you're always catching their mistakes, there is no accountability. They'll say, "Oh, they're going to just catch it for me if I make
it for me." Yeah.
If I had one person on commissions, he wouldn't put in the right commission amount, and he's like, "Oh, well, they'll fix it when they run commissions." And I'm like, "Well, that's more work for me. That's more work for my payroll team to catch those mistakes."
Right.
If you just did it right in the first place, which takes you 2 seconds, we wouldn't spend 5-10 minutes figuring out what the mistake was and why it happened, and clarifying with the entire team who's involved in determining that commission amount or that project, that sale order. It's crazy. Like, you can definitely let them make the mistake and let it affect them negatively if it has to. You don't want it to affect them negatively, but let them feel the negative emotion. Support them to get through it instead.
Yes. Yeah. That support is important. Yeah, I definitely like what you're saying. And yeah, I think empathy is the one thing I was going to say before is, my background, obviously in IO, but then previously being kind of clinically trained, empathy, I think a lot of the time the kind of the understanding of what empathy is a lot of people tie it to like mental health, or they tie it to clinical stuff. And yes, it's true that there is a tie there, but I'm really, it's kind of heartwarming to see that people are talking about it at work, because it is just a part of our human nature, right?
We have emotions.
Every day. Like, how weird.
Every second we have an emotion.
People have bad days. People get frustrated. People say things they don't, they regret later. And I think it's a job of a leader to be able to, like you said before, support them through that, have empathy for their situation, and then help them figure out what's my next right step.
Yeah, and if you have that supportive nature, they're going to come to you with mistakes. They're going to come to you and say, "Hey, can you help me?" Rather than hiding it, they're going to say, "Hey, can you help me with this? Let's work through it together." You say it too. Let's work through it together. One way I drive that is by really enforcing open door policies for both, the human resources team, but also with management, is tell us what's going on. I'd rather know what's going on in your life, even if something's affecting you, like if you have, a breakup, or you're in the middle of a move or something along those lines. I'd rather know about it so I can know that's why your work might not be as good, or this or that. Let's work through it. Let's help you get through that. Be mindful of it. Another term is mindfulness, getting through your emotions, letting yourself feel them. But I'd rather know what's going on through that open door policy in your life. And it develops a bigger relationship than management to staff. And it's huge in developing your team, and looking at your chart, your organizational structure is, this is the team I want to develop. These are the personalities that we need in our team, though. And this is the type of leader that's going to work most effectively with this team. And so, the way you set up your organizational chart, the leaders that you hire and the different aptitudes you hire in those leadership, or you build and develop in those leadership, is going to, lead to the success or flatness of your company. Because if your company is not growing, it's not considered successful, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and I think what we're kind of getting at here in some ways too is quality. You think about the organizational chart, and it's a clear kind of delineation of roles and all of those things, right? And you have your, you know, your solid lines and sometimes your dotted lines to different people and all of that stuff. But you as a leader get to choose how rough that line is drawn.
Yeah.
You know, like you get to choose if you want to have a smooth, empowering, psychologically safe, empathic space for your employees to work within. Or you can make it pretty, you know, rugged and not so great. You know, like there is a lot of power just in simply how people operate within their environment.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important. And I know we're going to have, you know, a guest later on kind of talking with us about leadership. And I think this will be an interesting thing to bring up, you know, with him. Just kind of this idea of what responsibility do we have? Because yes, there is inherent power, if you will, whatever, inherent power in being a leader. But can we shift that perspective a little bit into the power that you bring is less about telling people what to do, and it's more about creating a space where people feel empowered to take action and to be their best selves. You know?
As we discussed, focusing on the how. So how do they do it, or how does the company run? And how does what they do apply to the company rather than the what they do? So focus on the overall, like bigger picture rather than the little nitty gritty of a job in a sense. I know when writing job descriptions, it's you're building objectives and responsibilities, and usually they relate to learning and they relate to things that you could be doing externally from your position too. You know, connecting you to the different departments, the different positions that you're surrounding. Management, it can make or break a company. It really can. So I know it's honestly the number one factor for turnover is bad management. And so it's really important that you have empathic leaders, but empathic leaders that are confident in themselves so that they can lead people, because you don't want an empathic leader that's not confident in themselves, because are they really leading anything too? So you have to have the flexistability.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think that should be the name of the episode. Flexi stable. I don't know. I'm going to throw that in there.
Leadership
anyway.
Stable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is something we could talk about for days and days and days. But I know that people probably want to get back to their days after listening. So I'm wondering if maybe we wrap up now and then, you know, have our guests on next time.
Yeah, you guys will have to pick up with us a little bit later on. And I have a challenge for everyone to think about, you know, can everyone be a leader, or can only certain people be leaders? What do you think? There's a couple theories. Is it the skill-based theory of leadership or the big man theory of leadership? Let us know what you think.
Let us know what you think. Connect with us, send some messages, and comment on social media. And we will see you next time with our upcoming guest.
Okay, see you guys later.
Bye. This concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every other Tuesday for your next Whodunit. This is Organizational Sherlocks, closing today's case.